All right, well, super excited for our final session of the day and of the first ever Peaceful Leadership Summit. We're wrapping up with a really good, important, and kind of fun topic. It's de-escalation techniques for coworkers and customers. This is going to be led by my colleague, Luke Wiesner, who's helped put on this summit. Luke has been a conflict specialist since 2014, providing mediation, coaching, training, and facilitation to workplaces, families, neighbors, community organizations, and individuals. He's worked internally with nonprofit organizations and higher education institutions to create and design conflict management systems and programs. And working as an external consultant, Luke has worked with local government agencies, higher education, assisted living communities, hospitality businesses, nonprofits, boards of directors, and a lot of other complex teams to support conflict transformation work. He has a master's degree in negotiation and conflict resolution from Creighton University. Luke currently serves as head of programming for Peaceful Leaders Academy and as a program director and senior peace builder for Pollock Peacebuilding Systems. Happy to have you, Luke. Please take it away from here.
Good to be back. It feels a little bit undeserving with all these great speakers to be coming in and being the final topic of the day. But and also following Melinda is not going to be easy, especially since a lot of what we're going to be talking about in de-escalation has to do with exactly what Melinda was talking about. Because we are having these sessions recorded and going to be available for folks who couldn't make the session to be able to view, I will still go over some of the background that Melinda just went over, but I will most likely and very confidently not speak to it as eloquently as she did. So, so what we're going to be talking about today, hold on, let me share my screen here, for this 25 minutes is de-escalation. And I just want to set some realistic expectations that in 20 minutes, 25 minutes, depending on if we have time for questions, we're not going to cover everything on de-escalation. So disclaimer. But I know that you all, as people in the world who have families and friends and have been in different variety of work roles, have experienced escalation in your life, and have some experience and some tips, some best practices that you might have as well around de-escalation. So what I want to do is I want to invite you all, because I'm going to go through this presentation and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end, but I'm going to kind of ignore the chat on my end. But what I'm going to invite you all to do is open the chat. And as I'm going through this presentation, I want you all, anytime you think of something, any sort of de-escalation best practice that you could think of, just go ahead and type it in the chat. And then we get a little bit more of a repository for what I'm sharing with you, but also what other folks who are in this session might be thinking as well when it comes to de-escalation. So please kind of fill the chat with different ideas that you have that you've experienced and that you have some experience with in de-escalating different situations in your life. And hopefully some of the things I'll offer you today will ping some things for you. So going into this, there are going to be three things that I want us to focus on. So by the end of this 20 minutes, I want you to have a little bit of an understanding of why escalation occurs, which is, if you were just saw Melinda's presentation, you should be very familiar with this. I'm going to present it in a slightly different way, but it's going to be a lot of overlap. What is the goal of de-escalation? So if we're in a workplace or with a neighbor or a community member, what should the goal of the de-escalation process be? And then how to de-escalate. And more specifically is not, again, we're not talking about the entirety of how to de-escalate, but just a process to kind of lean on for that de-escalation. And then Jeremy, I don't know if you could help me out. I think Alice is still on as a panelist. If you want to put her as an attendee, that would be helpful. So those are our goals for today. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you all to do is think about a situation where maybe you are giving a presentation to your superiors, your coworkers, on a big project that you've been working on throughout the year. And so this is something that's really important to you. You're giving your big presentation, you're presenting to your supervisors, your peers. And in the middle of this presentation, someone in one of the audience members raises a question that in some way disrupts, kind of calls to attention maybe your inability to run the project. And so I want you to think about that situation. So this is a presentation, a project that you hold really dearly, that you're that you care a lot about, you put a lot of energy into it. And somebody just called you out in some way in front of all of your peers, in front of even your superiors, maybe even your team that you supervise is there as well. And I want you to think, and this should be kind of triggering some things that Melinda talked about as well. You might be noticing some things going on in terms of how you might be thinking about the situation. I love the SCARF model that Melinda shared. The way that we like to think about this, especially from a workplace lens, is kind of doing a risk analysis. And we try to focus on these 4 particular needs that when are undermined or people perceive a threat is being threatened in some way, produce escalation. And so those risk needs is kind of an acronym of respect, identity, safety, control. So respect being, do you feel respected in your role in front of your peers, in front of your supervisor? You might feel like in that situation that your respect is being disrupted in some way as a professional. Identity, your importance, how you show up at work, your work reputation, which and status, which I know Melinda talked about in the SCARF model, might be disrupted in this situation. Safety, the space that you're in, or do you feel safe to continue going on with that presentation? Do you feel safe in front of these to be able to express what you need to express in that moment? Is safety undermined or disrupted for you? And then control, and this one's going to be a reoccurring one that we're going to come back to throughout this presentation. But do you feel in control of the presentation? Do you feel in control over the space that you're in? Do you feel the autonomy to be able to move forward and operate in your role effectively? So as we move through these things, think of the SCARF needs as well, but also these risk needs that kind of overlap. And this is just maybe another way to kind of conceptualize how these needs, when undermined or unmet, produce escalation. And really what I want you all to start thinking about too is these escalation, if it is that escalation is stems from a real or perceived threat to one's needs, we can treat escalation, we can kind of run from it, or we can maybe react to it with our own escalation. But I want us to start reframing escalation to, okay, escalation is actually just a problem that's surfacing in some ways. As Jeremy put it, we're all just these we're a bunch of escalations waiting to happen from our neurochemistry. And so when these needs are disrupted, they explode in escalation. And when those escalations occur, we should be treating that as, okay, there's someone has a perceived real or perceived threat to their needs. How can I use this as an opportunity to resolve a problem, help somebody have a better experience at work, enhance or improve my relationship with somebody? So reframing the escalation to, okay, this is a sign that something's off, and let's try to explore this. I want to present to you kind of a different way of thinking about what Melinda was talking about, of when we have a disrupted need, we call it kind of a triggering event. So somebody undermines your respect in front of your colleagues. And what happens, just like what Melinda was saying, is we go into this escalated state where our body releases a little bit of cortisol and adrenaline. Again, Melinda explained this much better than I did. So if you're watching the video recording, go find Melinda's video as well, and for a more deeper dive on this particular process. But cortisol, as Melinda was talking about as well, interrupts our brain communication with our prefrontal cortex, redirects it to our limbic system and kind of our more emotional system. And what happens is that responding emotionally versus rationally, we start falling into these different cognitive errors. And one in particular that I want to highlight, there's a lot of them, but one is the fundamental attribution error. And the easiest way I can describe the fundamental attribution error is in a situation where, and this has actually happened to me before, and maybe it's happened to you all, but it takes a little bit of self-awareness to kind of recognize this. Let's say you're driving down the street and you're starting to get tailgated from the person behind you. And so you're looking in your rearview mirror, you're seeing this person tailgating you, and you can probably think about what kind of words or story that you might be saying about this person behind you. I won't say them on camera, but you can imagine what sort of language you might be using about this person. But then you look in front of you, you're looking in the rearview mirror, now you look in front of you, you've been so distracted at this person behind you that you didn't realize you're tailgating the person in front of you. And so the fundamental attribution error is our misattributing other people's unproductive behaviors to being specifically about them and their identity and who they are, and our unproductive behavior as being excused to our environment. So we're blaming the person behind us for tailgating, but we are excusing our tailgating because of factors in our external environment being tailgated ourselves. And so when we get caught up in the fundamental attribution error and cortisol, we're acting from emotions instead of from our rational brain, we often get to kind of a peak escalation where our judgment is decreased and our likelihood of choosing a constructive response is inhibited, and we often choose unconstructive responses. And when we choose unconstructive responses, we often re-trigger somebody else or redisrupt somebody else's need. And we fall into this cycle of escalation. This happens a lot in workplace settings where our disrupted needs, where it starts with our disrupted needs up top, someone disrupts our needs and it could, again, can be real or perceived. We get escalated, and then we respond from an escalated place where maybe we, in that meeting, somebody questions our effectiveness on this project in front of everybody. Maybe we, question something back at them and make them uncomfortable, or question their authority, or question their autonomy, or their identity in the workplace. And we now create their a disruption of needs for them, thus contributing to their escalation and thus their escalated response back to further disrupted needs. And you just get caught up in this cycle of escalation that can get really hard to unwind, to where eventually you don't even really know what started the escalation, but people are just operating from pure emotional standpoints, that the behavior is getting more and more unproductive. And so what we want to do with this is we want to think about this in two different ways. One, we want to normalize that people being escalated is a normal process. We all get escalated. It's something that's normal. So we can try to treat each other with compassion when other people are escalated. Just because they seem irrational doesn't mean that they are an irrational person. They're just a person who has a disrupted need, and they're trying to resolve it in an unproductive way because their prefrontal cortex is not necessarily completely online, or their brain communication has been redirected to their emotional body, and so they're responding emotionally, and that's coming across as irrational, perhaps. So what we want to do is we want to focus on where can we try to interrupt this process, and we want to interrupt it in between our escalation and our escalated response. That's really kind of the sweet spot of interruption here. Because if we go straight to response, we're just going to contribute to this escalation cycle. So how do we create space between our escalation and escalated response? So let's look at the ABCs of some quick tips of creating space between our escalation and our escalated response. The first is ask authentic questions. So when we ask questions, genuine questions that we want to understand more about somebody's experience, we delay the pressure of our responding. And we also gather information about how we can respond to somebody else. So if we respond without the necessary information, we are very likely not only responding from an escalated place, but we're also responding without really understanding what somebody cares about and what somebody's what maybe the underlying need or experience is. So asking questions is a great way to delay your escalation from your response. The B is breathe. Oxygen is one of the quickest ways to get cortisol out of your system, and the quickest way to get your body to redirect its energy back from your emotional systems back to your prefrontal cortex. So we want to take some deep breaths, decrease our cortisol, and increase our rational thought and decision-making, which is really important for de-escalating other people. You can kind of think about that, speaking of oxygen, as if you're taking a plane, they say put your own oxygen mask on first before you help the person next to you, because if you're so escalated, how are you going to help de-escalate a situation? So make sure that you are approaching the situation from an de-escalated place, and that comes with breathing. The C is calling for a break. So if you notice that It's really hard that this cycle is kind of getting out of control and there's not really any way to disrupt or create space between the escalation and the escalated response. Ask for a break, call for a break. But it has to be coming from a genuine place to want to continue the conversation. So it's not just, I'm done with you, I'll talk to you later. It's, hey, I really want to continue having this conversation with you. Can we pick it up, this afternoon at 1 o'clock? Let me put some time on your calendar and let's talk about it. You have to set a clear time to follow up. Otherwise, it looks to the other person like you're avoiding the conversation and thus fueling their escalation as well. So the ABCs, we really want to create space from our escalation or their escalation to escalated response by asking questions, breathing, or calling for a break. So now when we kind of get into this, I want to de-escalating and kind of helping other people put their oxygen mask on. I want to talk about the goal of de-escalation. Why are we having de-escalation in the first place? Why is it important? First of all, the goal is not to change policy or position. It's not for everyone to get their way, and it's not even necessarily to reach an agreement. It's maybe not even at this point, even having the conversation to reach an agreement. Really, our goal at this point is just to promote a standard of care for each other, which can encourage a constructive and productive dialogue so that we can increase our rational conversation and problem solving moving forward. If we try to jump straight into problem solving without de-escalating, we're having people having emotional conversation in a problem solving capacity, and that's not usually going to be effective. It's usually just going to continue the escalation. So we really want to make sure that we're de-escalating the situation before we move to problem solving. So that's our goal with de-escalation. I want to talk briefly about a process that we use, a four-step process that we talk about in an acronym called CARE: calmly listen, acknowledge, reassure, ease into dialogue. So I'm going to quickly go over these, and then we'll kind of see if there's any questions, or I'll check the chat to see if you're typing in some good de-escalation tools for yourself. An easy way to kind of think about the CARE acronym here is from past to future. So we're calmly listening and we're acknowledging is kind of honoring the past. What is somebody's history, experience? What are their feelings, needs, interests, goals? Let's acknowledge how somebody's feeling or has felt about what has happened. Let's bring them to the present and reassure them about now. And then let's ease into dialogue and move towards the future, where we can kind of hold both of our needs and priorities in kind of balance with each other and seek collaborative and creative problem solving moving forward. So let's take a look at these 4 steps real quick. So the first, calmly listen. Really good way to just kind of let them vent, let them do the talking, create space between if you're feeling escalated, let them lead the conversation. A lot of times people just need to feel heard. And so if you can give somebody a chance to kind of say their piece, give their day of court about what is built up in them that's causing so much cortisol in their system, give them that space to share what's going on for them. Be curious, seek understanding, and be caring. And if people feel like you're listening to them, they're going to be more likely to listen to you. And part of this too is being willing to offer empathy when it's least expected. As Melinda talked about last time, when people are in escalated, they're on threat detection. And so if they perceive you as a threat and you can kind of reframe them to hey, I'm here willing to listen to you, they might start the process of not necessarily seeing you as a threat, which goes directly into our acknowledge and align of the care process, of where we're acknowledging their experience. We're aligning with any common ground that we have. And I will say, some people say, well, what if you don't have common ground? Most situations, if you're trying to have a de-escalated conversation with somebody, you have some sort of mutually shared interest, or at least a relationship moving forward. Because if somebody's escalated with me and I have no need to be in the conversation, I'm just going to leave. So there's usually always a baked in alignment of desire for resolution, desire for positive relationship or working together. So you can always kind of align. And then if there's a situation where you played a part in the escalation, you really want to make sure that you're taking ownership over your role. And that's going to promote other people to then take ownership over their role as well. If maybe they're feeling defensive and not feeling like they can truly engage in that level at this point. A lot of times we get questions of, well, what if I don't agree with them? Acknowledgement is not agreement. Acknowledgement is simply letting them know you understand their experience. So I'm actually, oh, I'm sorry, did I just stop sharing my screen here? I'm sorry, let me reshare my screen. I apologize about that. Okay, so that's calmly listen, acknowledge, and then the R is reassure. Bring them to the present, start shifting towards the future, and really with an emphasis on building a partnership with somebody. Let's see if we can work on a solution together. And the reason why this is important is it's kind of like a bridge step, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to go straight from acknowledgement to the past to straight to the future without helping them see that you're a partner in this and kind of bringing them to the now. Because people are so focused on the past, it's hard for them to move forward until we can kind of slowly bring them to, hey, we're partners in this and let's try to work through this. We're going to do that together. And then we can start moving forward. And that's where the E comes in, ease into dialogue. This is a great opportunity to share your needs and goals in a way that, using I statements and trying to come from a place of keeping the care in mind and trying to work in partnership with them to seek resolutions, maybe offer or elicit suggestions or seek buy-in in terms of what those next steps are in terms of the resolution that you're coming to. And sometimes in situations, the escalation requires compliance. And for the sake of time, I'll just encourage people, if you're watching the recording, or if you're here live when you get the recording, to go listen to Paul Falcone's session who gives a really detailed talk on HR compliance and those types of things. But the one thing I'll just highlight on this is really making sure you preserve autonomy in this. So if you need somebody to act differently or you need some sort of different behavior, let them know what the alternative is to not complying with what you're needing them to do. Because then you're restoring a need for them, which is autonomy, and then they get to make a choice that is in their best interest. So the last thing, I'll just kind of do a summary here, and then we'll kind of look at the chat and see if there's any questions or other de-escalation tools that you've all come up with. And if you haven't typed in the chat a question or de-escalation tools that you found to be effective, go ahead and throw them in the chat so other people can see those. So just as a review, escalation is normal. It's an opportunity, and it can happen to anybody. It can be an opportunity to improve relationships, solve problems, instill trust and safety within your teams. And so we want to pay attention to escalation and seek it out. So when there's escalation, we want to try to see that as an opportunity for resolution. And then we want to create space between our escalation and our response through asking questions, breathing, and calling for a break if we need to, because we don't want to bring our escalation into an already escalated or tense situation and just fuel the fire in how that conversation is going to happen moving forward. And then we want to use our care tools to move slowly from the past, acknowledge people's experience, to the present, build partnership, and then move to the future where we can kind of ease into a dialogue and do so with care. So that's de-escalation in 25 minutes. I know there's a lot of things around de-escalation that we maybe don't have time to talk about, which is why I'm hoping that if you have, from your experience, you want to share any thoughts that you have, please do so in the chat. Otherwise, we're like right at time. But I'm just getting a note from Jeremy. If there's any questions, we can go a couple minutes more. So any questions, comments, or other de-escalation tools that you found to be effective that you want to throw in the chat, please do. And I'm not seeing any, what if somebody just won't calm down? That's a really common question. And one thing that isn't incorporated in the care process that I think is really important to highlight in this is to maintain messaging. So anytime that you have a situation where you go through and you're like, I'm calmly listening, I acknowledge, but they still won't calm down, my recommendation would be to just stay on message, stay using the care tools, continue to listen, continue to acknowledge. And if you get to the point where it's just not being effective, you got to call a break. And make sure that you're creating that space for them in between their escalation and their escalated response. Because if they're just on a cycle and you're listening and you're acknowledging and you're reassuring, and it's still not helping, you got to create space, because they're just not in a place where they can start transitioning and start seeing that partnership. So I would definitely recommend just continue to lean on these tools, even if you sound like a broken record, even if you have said and acknowledged what you feel like is going on for somebody already. It's okay to say it again. When people are escalated again, they're not thinking rationally, they're thinking emotionally. And so sometimes it might take a couple times for people to really hear what you're saying, or they just haven't gotten it all off their chest yet. So I would just recommend is maintain your messaging and continue to stick with listening, acknowledgement, aligning, reassuring. I would avoid easing into dialogue until you do fully de-escalate the situation. What's something that you do to create that space when somebody is starting to attack you personally? So that's a great question. And I would, when it starts getting unproductive, I always recommend just honoring kind of how you're feeling and just saying, hey, I'm feeling escalated, and go straight to a break. If you feel like it's getting to a place where there's attacks going on and you don't have the support of a third party, or and this isn't necessarily, we could also talk about giving feedback to somebody, which again, we're not talking about that in this context. We don't have time for that. But if you felt comfortable giving them that feedback live, I would say go ahead. But normally I would say if people are attacking you personally, I think it's really okay to try to call a break, let them know that this is important to you, but put a time on the calendar where both of you can kind of calm down and prepare your thoughts in terms of how you move forward in the conversation. Again, this is more focused on a workplace type situation. So there's that continued buy-in for continued relationship. Layla, I think you're bringing up some different de-escalation tactics. Talk about what connects you, commonalities, previous alignment, admiration, importance of relationships, shared values. Yeah, that whole point of kind of finding the common ground. And there's almost, in a workplace situation, there's almost always built-in common ground and alignment that you can build with somebody through shared clients, shared stakeholders, shared success, shared teamwork, future relationship. Even if it's not related to what is causing the escalation, moving towards grounding each other in what your shared alignment is and what your common ground is a super important part to help them start not seeing you as the threat to their needs, but see you as maybe a partner in being able to work through whatever it is that's causing the escalation in the first place. So it looks like we're right at time, but thank you all for your comments and questions. And Jeremy, I don't know if you want to